If you dread initiating tough conversations with people you supervise, there is a better way. They may have had a lapse in judgment, they may have screwed something up, they may have not turned in something that needed to get turned in, or maybe it's a little bit more serious than that. For most supervisors and leaders, this creates anxiety. There can be that pit in the stomach of, I'm going to have to talk to them about this. Or on the flip side, there's no apprehension about talking to them about it, but it never seems to go well because you just sort of give them a piece of your mind. Whichever way this plays out for you, if this is not knocking it out of the park with a home run conversation that they're leaving more committed, more connected, and much less likely to make that same mistake again, then I'm telling you right now, there is a better way. Welcome to IDD Leader, where human services leaders grow their impact, lead with heart, and build the workplaces our field deserves. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. I'm so glad you're joining me on the IDD Leader podcast. April is Stronger Supervisors Month. It's the first time we're trying to do it with a monthly theme. And this month, I'm doing solo episodes. We have an awesome lineup of guests. I already have multiple next guests lined up, and those interviews will start to be coming out in a couple weeks from now, starting in the month of May. But for this month, I thought we'd just take the whole month and focus on how can we strengthen our frontline supervisors. Whether you are a frontline supervisor or whether you're one of the managers, executives, HR director, whoever's overseeing frontline supervisors in one way, shape, or form. Well, today's topic is all about tough conversations. These come up, and not infrequently, when you are a leader of people. Why? Because leadership is messy, and because people make mistakes, ourselves included, myself included. I know for me, for years, I did not do these conversations very well. I fell into one of the most common pitfalls, which is to avoid or delay when I would first see that there's a problem, something that probably should get addressed. Someone's doing something that really isn't in line with the values or the culture that I'm trying to build, or that we as an organization are trying to build. And I'd notice it and I'd think, oh, well, that wasn't quite in line, and hopefully it won't happen again. Or I might justify it to myself in many other ways. Like, well, they just started. I don't want to scare them away by bringing it up so quickly. Or, maybe that wasn't on purpose and the next time they'll do it better. This could be anything from tardiness to, if you have a dress code that they didn't follow the dress code, to something a bit more serious, like the way they interacted with an individual, it had an edge to it where they were joking around, but it almost could seem like they're kind of either not purposely making fun of the individual, but just, I don't know, something about it didn't quite sit right. It could be hundreds of things. But whatever it is, you noticed it. Or in my story, I noticed it. And what I would do is I would sit on it. And I would sit on it, and then I would think about acting. And then eventually, after it happened multiple times, I'd bring myself to act. And I have these conversations. I can remember one guy that I used to supervise. He had so many strengths, but following directions was not one of them. He had a lot of good ideas, but he often had too high of an opinion of his own ideas. Anyhow, he was a little bit of a handful and was the best and worst employee at the same time, if you know what I'm saying. And I can remember I saw something he did, and I thought, yeah, that's not quite right. It just wasn't in line with the values we were trying to build. So I set up a separate time to talk with him, outside the moment, because I didn't want to embarrass him. Frankly, I probably wasn't even ready to have the conversation then either. So pull him aside, have a separate conversation like a week later, which in hindsight was probably way too long of a time to wait. But anyhow, pull him aside, have this conversation, and I say, you remember that thing that happened on Tuesday last week? Well, tell me about your experience. And he kind of talked about it. Okay, well, actually, with how we're trying to do things here, that didn't really go with this policy. And then I explained the policy, and he had this kind of deer in headlights look like, oh, okay. And then, so I gently sort of tried to say, well, I need you to do that differently. Can you try to do that differently next time? And he's like, yeah, I think I could try to do that. Well, next thing you know, a month or maybe it was 6 weeks later, he's doing the same exact thing again. So I'm thinking, oh, Did he not understand? Why is this conversation, why didn't it click for him? But did I address him on that next time? No, I waited till it happened like 3 more times. Why? Because I really didn't know how to have those conversations. Um, that is the whole purpose of our conversation today, is because since that time, I really worked on learning some tools that I found helpful. And then as I've shared them with other people through the past number of years now, I get consistent feedback that this is something that's really helpful for them as well. So we're going to dive right into the tools now. The first prerequisite, this is essential. You have to, as a leader, as a boss, as a manager, a supervisor, you have to work towards creating a safe place for feedback to happen. In other words, the only time your direct reports are hearing from you should not be whenever you're telling them something that they need to change or correct. And they need to know that you're for them, that you're rooting for them, that you're on their team. This is a fundamental decision that you as a supervisor or leader get to make, that the moment that somebody comes on the team, that your goal is that their life will be enriched for being in this workplace. And that however long they're with you, which hopefully will be a long time, but however long they're with you, that you're going to help propel them towards future growth. Not in a forceful way, but that like you're there for their good. I really almost would say it's just having a strong sense that you are, more than anything else as a boss, you're a coach. With a coach's mindset, we have team goals, and certainly every organization has goals. There's revenue goals, there's mission statement goals. There's usually quarter 1, year 5 goals. And as a leader or as a supervisor, you're trying to help make sure everybody does the actions that are needed to move the whole team towards those goals. But in the midst of that, you have to be for each individual on the team as well, not at the expense of the larger goal, but actually that is in support of the larger goal. And so creating safety, I think it comes down to 2 main things. And then I'm going to give you a 3-part script that you can use for these tough conversations. But creating safety is about your own personal emotional regulation. That's kind of a fancy way of putting it. You got to manage yourself and be aware of what kinds of body language, tone of voice, things that you're giving off. So if I'm personally frustrated, that is not the time to have the conversation with the employee 90% of the time. If it's egregious, I might not have a chance to wait. We might have to address it even if I'm still feeling those things. And then I just have to be smart about that I don't overdo it with strong emotions. But most of the time, I want to get to myself to be calm, even, 10 minutes later or 30 minutes later, calm myself down so that I'm not feeling either too anxious, worried, nervous, oh, how are they going to take it, or not too mad because I'm frustrated with what they just did, or whatever it is. But that self-regulation piece creates safety. And that's part 1 of how to create safety, is to be managing one's own emotions or emotional regulation. Part 2, or the second component, is to make sure that I'm thinking about their experience. Now, I know that sounds really elementary, but a lot of times if I'm only thinking about what I can see and the story I'm telling myself, I'm going to be completely blind to their experience of whatever this thing is. And I learned this a lot from Joseph Grenny, who wrote or co-wrote a book called Crucial Conversations. Great book. But we fill in the gaps of stories. So if I told you right now that, okay, we'll just say there's a 50-year-old man who's a middle manager at a company, and he just started having lunch with this young, attractive woman 2 to 3 times per week at a nearby restaurant, and it's not his wife. Did you start to fill in a story there a little bit? Now, how about if I tell you that it's his daughter that he's having lunch with, and she recently got hired at a nearby company? Whoa, does that sort of change the story of how we fill in the gaps of the pieces we don't know? That is something that happens a lot because our brains are good at solving puzzles and are always looking to problem solve. And when there's gaps in information, we usually just fill those in, not even realizing we fill those in. So the second piece of creating psychological safety is being really aware of those gaps and then looking for what is the other person's experience of whatever it is that we're talking about. And if I can keep that at the forefront, that helps me be able to take on keeps my perspective in check, helps me take on their perspective, and it helps me approach the whole thing keeping my coach's hat on. Because if I'm just mad about how it cost the team from winning the championship or how it made us get a ding on our latest audit or whatever it is, I'm not really thinking about it from their experience or their perspective. So I'd say those are two key elements for creating safety: self-management and looking at it through their perspective or through how their experience of it is, and asking them questions along those lines. Okay, that leads right into the 3-part script. The first thing is about curiosity. And I like to lead with the question, help me understand what such and such was like for you. Help me understand what happened. That seemed like a rough afternoon. What happened? What do you see that contributed to that? The goal here is to ask it in an open-ended way. Don't say, help me understand why you're an idiot or something to that effect. That's not effective at all. But help me understand, and getting at their experience, that very same thing I just said about creating safety. This question is aimed at starting to get safe, trying to maintain that safety and start to help them get curious about their own performance, their own judgment call, their own decision. And it's to help me know there's gaps in what I see a certain thing, but I don't see the whole picture. So what am I missing here? What else is there? So starting with help me understand and having a good open-ended question leading into making it safe for them to share what their experience of it was. Here's a key indicator. If they respond defensively to this, that could it be because their history and experience with performance-based conversations has not been a pleasant one. And that's true for many of us. So you may have to kind of push past that or ask sort of the same type of question a couple times to try to get past that. Or that may be because of how you lead, and that's it's not a disaster, but it's something to really consider. Maybe that self-management piece isn't in place, is what I'm trying to say. So you want to kind of do a quick self-assessment on that. But if you start with the help me understand, and then you really just shut up and listen, a lot of people, once they realize you're not going to bite their hand off or bring out the hammer the moment that they share something, they might tread lightly at first, but they usually start to answer something, even if it is a little bit defensive. And then you can follow up with a follow-up question that's still getting at the same thing. Oh, yeah. So let's suppose they relate. Oh, yeah, I really hear you caught all the red lights today. Or, yeah, your kid was sick, so it was slower to getting them dropped off at daycare. I really hear you on that. I'd like to understand more. What happened to where you allowed it to cut it so close that if you caught all the red lights, you wouldn't make it on time? What was going through your mind? What was your experience of that? Was it stressful coming in knowing that you might be late? Again, you're trying to unlock curiosity, your own curiosity and theirs, because curiosity leads to solutions. Judgment, you might get a short-term return. That was hard to say. Short-term return on that. But when you bring out judgment or when you bring down the hammer, it doesn't lead to long-term change. It's just as much as that person's watching me. So just them looking over their shoulder. If this person's here, okay, I'll do it the right way. But it doesn't get buy-in. It doesn't get long-term change. Okay. So that's part one, the curiosity. Help me understand. The second part of the script is all about clarity. And the way to create clarity is once there's some understanding of what happened, it's really this, and that puts you kind of shoulder to shoulder with the person. Then you're sort of bringing out or representing the standard, like this is what needs to happen. And the way to do that, or a good way to do that, is to say, I need you to X by Y so that Z. I need you to show up on time every day for work, starting immediately, starting tomorrow, at least for the next month, so that we don't have to have a corrective action plan. And that's like the negative version or the positive version, so that other teammates aren't waiting on you and we don't have to be worried about whether we're going to have the right ratios in our coverage or whatever the case may be. It's where you bring clarity on this is the standard. And this is, I'll just be really honest, this is the part I was so terrible at before. Well, one of the parts, I might not have been good at any of them, but even if I started asking some decent questions, I would almost never get to the part about basically, I need you to do this, buy this or else this, or so that this. I just, it's like I would never bring it to a head. I would just kind of beat around the bush and be like, well, let's have that be different for next time. But there was no clarity of reward if they're doing it right or how that, contributes to the common good necessarily. And there definitely wasn't any clarity on, well, what's going to happen if they don't? But that, it doesn't do anybody a favor to be unclear. In fact, I heard this great phrase, clarity is kindness. Because it is. That's how we can most serve people. If I'm someone's coach, okay, I grew up playing tennis. So if I'm someone's tennis coach, I'm not doing them a favor by not telling them what to fix on the way they're swinging the racket. I'm doing them a favor by being clear. You need to work on your follow through. It actually goes like this, and then demonstrating it, and then watching them do it and giving them feedback. That is how we serve somebody. And truly, if you're in a boss role, a leadership role, the goal is to serve people. It's to help them become the best version of them that they can as it relates to their work tasks. And in doing that, the whole team will thrive, and you'll certainly meet the goals of the mission and the financial goals, these kinds of things. All right, I'm starting to digress, so let me get right back on it. So bringing clarity is crucial. And if you are a more beat around the bush kind of person or less assertive, I want to encourage you, this is probably the part that's going to be the hardest, is that clarity. If you're really assertive, the first part I said about the curiosity or the leading with open-ended questions, that might feel very unnatural because you're just used to telling people, well, you got to do it like this or else. That's not bad that you're giving the clarity of that. However, if you lead with questions and get people curious, they're much more likely to come up with actual solutions or figure out what was contributing to them not performing it right in the first place. All right. So there's kind of the two pitfalls, right? If you're overly assertive or overly avoidant, part one or part two of this could be where you're going to need to key in on the most. But there is a third part, and this is kind of a big difference maker between having a conversation that feels like it goes well. Like if you do part one and two well, it will feel like the conversation went well. However, it might not lead to change without part three. And this is crucial. This last one is commitment. So part one was curiosity. Part two was clarity. Part three is commitment. And I like to do that also with a question, which is to say, what are you going to do differently to make sure that X never happens again, or to make sure that Y always happens, whatever it is that you're addressing? What are you going to do differently to make sure? And then there's a second part to that question. That's part one of that question. And the second half of it would just be to say, and what can I do to help support you in that? So you see what's happened here? If we kind of visualize this, a lot of times when someone has a performance issue, we put that performance issue right in between us in the relationship, and we say, here's this performance issue. Or we dance around it, skirt around it, and it's never clearly addressed. It's really, like I said a minute ago, it usually goes in one of those two directions. But with this script, when you say, help me understand, we're bringing it up with curiosity. I'm coming alongside that person. It's more of a shoulder-to-shoulder thing. Then when I'm bringing the clarity, it's like I'm representing the standard, like, boom, well, this is what needs to happen. And then part three is, how can I help you achieve this standard or maintain this standard? So again, I'm shoulder to shoulder. I'm side by side with them, rooting for them to do it. But the standard's not changing. And I'm not going to back down from that being the reality that it is. But the other thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to be the one to make sure that they hold the standard, as in do all the work myself. I mean, I am going to make sure they hold the standard. I didn't say that as clearly as I needed to. I can't problem solve how to fix it more than they're problem solving how to fix it, or else I'm setting myself up to constantly be babysitting, reminding, prompting, these kinds of things. That's where asking them, what are you going to do differently? You're putting the ball squarely in their court. What are you going to do differently to make sure that we don't have to have this conversation again? Or that from now on, such and such changes. And it's so powerful getting that commitment, because if they were curious about it and then they see the standard, they see how they didn't match up with it, that's good. But until they say, well, this is what I'm going to do differently, until they can articulate what change they're going to make, the conversation shouldn't be over. And once they've communicated what they're going to do differently, and maybe they do need something from you, if they do, by all means, that's a great moment for them to share it. And if they had psychological safety, if you created safety around the conversation, they'll probably feel free to share that. So yeah, there actually could be a follow-up as a supervisor, like, oh my goodness, well, yeah, we asked you one time for that 3 months ago in an email and never followed up. Okay, that makes sense why you didn't get that done, even though it ended up being really important. So there could be something that's pointed out in the system or that needs to adjust. But having them get commitment, you're looking for buy-in. Because what often happens is the supervisor's more bought in on that person changing than they are. And you know that situation's backwards. I mean, that's like the therapist that wants the client to get better more than the client wants the client to get better. Please, can we meet again for our, counseling session so that I can help you fix you? I have a little bit of background doing some in-home therapy and things. It's not the most comfortable relationship when you're the one trying to push the ball down the field by lifting the player up and carrying the player who's holding the ball. It works a lot better when that person puts their own 2 feet underneath them. And that commitment question or set of questions, it's all about that. It's all about them seeing, well, this is what needs to change. This is not this, it can't be vague. It has to be very specific. What thing are you going to do? What things are you going to do differently so that we don't have to keep having to have this conversation, or so that we don't have to, get HR involved or whatever it is. And then as they're sharing that, then if you start to see any veering off the course, you don't just have to, as the supervisor, you don't just have to come back and say, oh, look, you're doing it again. You can say, well, wait, hold on a second. You said you were going to set this extra alarm for yourself, which I know it's kind of a silly example, or you said that you were going to do such and such. How's that going? Did it work? And maybe there's another breakdown. And sometimes that can just takes a few versions or iterations till it gets it right. But that third component really is where the commitment happens. Now, I always try to leave you with something actionable, a next step that you could take right now. I think probably the most helpful thing with this is simply to self-identify, of those 3 different parts of the script, which one do you kind of readily recognize, like, oh my goodness, yeah, I'm not really doing that at all. Or I'm doing part of it, but it's really not having I'm not doing it the full way. I'm not getting the intended effect. And then the next time you have a performance conversation, which probably happens on a multiple times a month, weekly basis, I would imagine at some level, depending on how many people you report to you. But use that part of the script and see if it doesn't unlock something different or make it more likely that you don't have to chase them down in the future. So that'd be my next step. The other thing is I have a free resource for you that I'd love for you to pick up. It's at iddleader.com/burnout. It's 7 warning signs that your supervisors or yourself, that you're unintentionally contributing to staff burnout. This happens a lot. In fact, one of the signs we actually kind of covered today, at least in part, which is avoiding tough conversations until things blow up. That's a warning sign that's going to move staff towards burnout. And then I give different ideas and tools to address each of the 7 warning signs. So you can get that, iddleader.com/burnout. And if you're listening to this in real time, easy for me to say, we have the Leadership Lab May cohorts about to launch. There are other cohorts of that will be launching in the future as well. That is a place where we do deep dives, kind of like today's episode, on different leadership habits that help supervisors or even higher level leaders and managers go from yeah, I manage a team or I supervise people to, wow, I have this confidence that I can build a team people never want to leave. Why? Because there are simple leadership habits that make all the difference in the world. Whatever your role is, I know that you are giving it your best. I think I've never met somebody that's not trying hard. And even if it appeared at first that they weren't, they still were. And if you're listening to this podcast and you made it to the end, you obviously are trying hard because you're looking to resource yourself. Feel free to share this episode with a colleague or with people on your team. But this is what I want to say. I have so much respect for all the people that are in the trenches and are frontline supervisors all the way on up, frontline workforce, direct support professionals, you name it, frontline clinicians. I have so much respect for you because you're in the game. You're on the field and you're making a difference in people's lives. So until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.